Hello, my name is Sarah. My sister sent me a perfume for my birthday. No card, no warmth, just 2 words. It smelled expensive, but something about it never felt like a gift, so I gave it to her husband. Days later, that same scent nearly ruined his career and unraveled everything she spent years hiding. A hidden trust, a forged signature, a second bottle she never meant for me to see. What kind of sister gifts you something designed to erase you from the family? And what would have happened if I had kept it? Would I still be here to tell you this? It was quiet that morning, too quiet, the kind that settles over a place and makes every little sound feel louder than it should. The mail slot clanked sharply against the wood, and I flinched, though I knew it was nothing more than the usual delivery. Outside, the wind rustled the trees behind the cottage, and the faint scent of chimney smoke drifted through the open kitchen window. Autumn had always been my season, with its silence and small certainties. I made a cup of chamomile tea, the same way I always did. 1 spoon of honey, a twist of lemon. The mug warmed my palms as I stepped onto the back porch, wrapping my shawl tighter around my shoulders. The air had that crisp bite only October in Asheville could offer. Cool, but not bitter, like it hadn't made up its mind whether to comfort or warn. At the bottom of the steps, a small brown parcel rested beside my mailbox. No note, no bright ribbons or celebratory stickers, just a sharp, clean fold and a shipping label. I crouched, picked it up, and walked back inside. The box wasn't heavy, just enough weight to suggest something intentional. I set it down on the kitchen table, peeled back the tape, and lifted the lid. Perfume. A tall glass bottle rested in black velvet, its pale amber liquid catching the light. It was the kind of perfume you didn't buy at the local pharmacy. This was boutique, Parisian, the kind people display more than wear. Next to it, nestled in the corner, was a card. Just 2 words. Happy birthday. That was it. No, love Seraphine. No, to my sister. No hint of affection. Just the kind of generic well-wish you'd find in a chain store card bin. It felt like a placeholder someone else had written. I stared at it for longer than I should have. My tea had gone lukewarm. I reached for it, sipped, and said aloud, though no one was there to hear me, I've received more warmth from strangers than I ever did from Seraphine. That might have been cruel, but it wasn't untrue. I left the box open on the table and walked to the window. The trees were starting to change, the first hints of red and gold whispering through the leaves. A wind chime across the street tinkled softly. It should have felt peaceful. But all I could think about was how this was the first time in years my sister had remembered my birthday on time, and even then, it felt like a transaction. Later that afternoon, I sat on the couch with the bottle in my hand, turning it over slowly. It was beautiful, no denying that. The kind of thing that belonged in a magazine, or maybe on Seraphine's bathroom vanity. Not on mine, not in this tiny rented cottage filled with secondhand furniture and dog-eared library books. It smelled expensive. Floral, but not sweet. A little sharp, like citrus rinds and old money. I set it down and stared at the card again. The more I looked at it, the more I felt like I didn't exist. That night, I pulled out an old memory. Aurelian, my brother-in-law, had once fixed my flat tire in the middle of a downpour when Seraphine told me she couldn't possibly miss her hair appointment. He didn't make a big show of it, didn't make me feel like an inconvenience. Just showed up with a toolbox and a quiet kind of kindness that stayed with me. He was always like that, not soft exactly, but solid, reliable. The next morning, I wrapped the perfume in tissue paper and placed it in a small gift bag I'd saved from a book fair. It was bright red and had tiny owls on it, ridiculous next to something so elegant, but I didn't care. That evening, I showed up to the family dinner Seraphine had planned. Her house, of course. She always hosted, always controlled the lighting, the music, the wine. She greeted me at the door with a tight smile and a champagne flute already in her hand. "Glad you made it," she said, then turned before I could respond. Dinner was polite, as always. Conversations that skimmed over politics, avoided anything personal. Aurelian was the only one who asked how work was going, and when I told him the city had finally approved the new bookmobile budget, he smiled like it genuinely meant something. After we finished dessert, I handed him the bag. "It's just something I think suits you more than me," I said softly. "Too refined for me, really." He opened it slowly, pulled out the perfume, and raised his eyebrows. Wow, this is the nicest gift I've gotten in years." He laughed, genuinely. The sound relaxed the stiffness in my shoulders. "Thank you, Sarah. Really." Seraphine looked at the bottle, then at me. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said, "that was meant for you." There was a pause. I felt it hang between us. "I know," I replied, reaching for my water glass. "But I thought Aurelian might get more use out of it." She didn't argue, just sipped her wine and changed the subject. By the time I left, the sky had deepened into that purple blue that comes just before night. I walked home, not in a hurry. The air was cool and the street quiet. It gave me time to think, to replay her expression when he opened the gift. Not anger, something else. Unease, like she hadn't expected it to change hands. Back home, I slipped off my shoes and sat on the porch swing with a blanket wrapped around my legs. The birthday card lay on the side table. I picked it up, turned it over in my hand again. 2 words. That was all. A chill moved through me, not from the wind. And for the first time, a question took root in my mind. What if that perfume wasn't meant for me at all? 2 days passed, and that question never left my mind. It stayed with me as I stacked library books back into place, whispered through the rustling pages of overdue novels, and hung in the air between dinner and silence. Even when I tried to talk myself out of it, convincing myself I was being overly sensitive, maybe even petty, it was still there, curled in the corner of my thoughts like smoke from a fire that hadn't gone out. So when my father asked me to return his book to Seraphine, the one I'd lent him weeks ago, I offered to drop it off without hesitation. Part of me just wanted to get it over with. But the deeper part, the part I tried to ignore, wanted to see her again. To look her in the eye and see if something in her expression would confirm what I already feared. By the time I reached their place, the sun had started slipping behind the trees, casting that soft, late afternoon glow across their porch. Her house stood there like a magazine spread, neat, polished, no weeds in the yard. Everything in its place. Seraphine always said homes should speak for you before you speak for yourself. Mine probably whispered that I drank too much tea and didn't dust enough. I knocked once. No answer. And then the front door creaked open. "Come in," she called from somewhere inside. I stepped in, clutching the worn novel in my hand. The smell of rosemary and lemon filled the entryway, probably from one of her signature diffuser blends. The house looked immaculate, of course. Table set, candles arranged just so. Seraphine's voice floated from the kitchen, light and full of charm. I followed the sound until I caught sight of her standing at the counter, laughing. Dressed in cream slacks and a silk blouse, her makeup flawless even at 5 o'clock. Aurelian stood beside her, sleeves rolled up, holding a cutting board. "Hey, Sarah," he said warmly, smiling when he saw me. "Didn't expect you till later." I nodded, raising the book. "Just dropping this off for Dad." Seraphine turned, eyes bright, smile still intact. But something shifted, only for a second, when Aurelian leaned toward her. I saw him pause and smile, then reach over and tap the side of his neck. "You notice anything different?" he asked playfully. Before she could answer, he stepped back with a flourish. "I'm wearing that cologne, the one Sarah gave me." The room froze, not completely, just enough. Seraphine's smile tightened. Barely. Her fingers, which had been hovering over the wine glasses, lowered an inch. It was a pause so small, someone less familiar with her might have missed it. But I didn't. "You're wearing that?" she asked, her voice just a little too sharp. Then, as if realizing how it sounded, she added quickly, "I mean, now?" Aurelian chuckled. "Yeah, thought I'd try it. Smells expensive." He shot me a wink. "You sure you didn't want to keep it?" I smiled. "Positive." Seraphine didn't say anything else. She turned back to arranging appetizers with too much focus. I stood there a moment longer, trying to ignore the feeling creeping up my spine, that slight shift in her face, I'd seen it before. When I was 12, Mom's heirloom necklace went missing. Days later, Seraphine claimed she found it under my bed, but I remembered the panic in her eyes when Dad first noticed it was gone, the way she couldn't meet my gaze until she had a way out. That same look was in her eyes now, polished panic. A few minutes later, Aurelian walked me to the foyer. "Thanks again for the gift," he said. "I'm not exactly a fancy cologne guy, but hey, I feel like a senator wearing it." I chuckled softly. "You pull it off better than I ever could." He hesitated. "Seraphine didn't say anything weird about it, did she?" I shook my head. "Not directly." He furrowed his brow but didn't push. I appreciated that about him. He always knew when to leave a thought alone. We said goodbye, and I stepped out onto the porch just as the sky turned that soft, smoky pink that always made Asheville feel like a painting. Instead of going home, I took a detour through the neighborhood, letting my legs walk me through memories I didn't ask for. I remembered the garage sale when I was 16. I'd spent the better part of a year sketching in a notebook, a mix of terrible poetry and even worse drawings, but it was mine. Seraphine had offered to help me declutter, which back then sounded like kindness. Weeks later, I found that notebook on someone's front table, priced at 50 cents. When I'd confronted her, she laughed, said she thought I didn't want it anymore, that I'd grown out of it. Said it with that same tone she used when she messed up but never admitted it. That tone clung to my memory like fog. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights right away. Just stood in the kitchen and let the quiet wrap around me. I set the book down, boiled some water, and waited for the kettle to sing. I didn't want to believe anything sinister, but the feeling wouldn't leave me alone. That perfume, her reaction, something didn't add up. I had no proof, only instinct, but sometimes instinct is louder than facts. 2 days later, I returned to their house. Seraphine was hosting a dinner for one of Aurelian's clients. A small group, just 4 people. I offered to help set the table because I needed to be near her. Not to accuse, to watch. She gave me the linen napkins, and I folded each one slowly, making sure my hands didn't tremble. Seraphine moved gracefully around the room, but her eyes kept darting to me, like she expected me to break something. She paused at the edge of the dining table, adjusted a flower arrangement, then said without turning, "Some gifts aren't meant to be passed on, Sarah." The words weren't loud, but they sliced. I kept folding napkins. "And some gifts," I said calmly, "aren't meant to be given." She turned to look at me then, really looked. There wasn't anger in her eyes, not yet, just that calculating stillness, the same one she used when she wanted something to disappear without getting her hands dirty. We didn't say anything else, but in that moment, we both knew something had changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough. By the time I got back to my place, the silence was a little too sharp. I remember walking in, setting my keys down, and letting the question echo again in my head, over and over like a faucet dripping in the middle of the night. Some gifts aren't meant to be given. The next morning, the chill in the air felt different. Like it wasn't just weather anymore, it was warning. I woke up restless, and before I'd even made coffee, my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. It was Aurelian. "Hey, can we talk? Something weird happened today." There was no punctuation, no context, just that. I read the message twice before calling him. He didn't pick up. An hour later, I sat in my car in the parking lot outside his downtown office, watching the front door like I was casing the place. I hated that I felt nervous, but something in his message had knocked the wind out of me. When he finally opened the door and waved me in, I noticed it immediately. He looked tired, not physically, but like someone who was walking around with too many unsaid things. "Thanks for coming," he said, motioning toward the small meeting room next to reception. "I didn't know who else to call." I nodded, followed him inside, and sat across from him. "You okay?" I asked. He exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. "Depends on how you define okay." That's when he told me. He'd worn the cologne to a pitch meeting with a tech client, big account, 2 execs, 1 assistant, all seated around a glossy conference table while he laid out a 12-month contract plan. Halfway through, one of the execs started coughing. Bad. Then wheezing. She reached for her inhaler, but it didn't help. Her face turned blotchy. They had to call paramedics. "The assistant," Aurelian said, leaning forward. Before they left, she pulled me aside and asked what cologne I was wearing. I told her it was a gift. He paused. She looked startled. Then she said something like, "I thought I recognized that scent. It's very specific." I felt my stomach pull tight. He looked at me. "Sarah, I think that perfume might have been a bad idea." I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it. A million thoughts rushed through at once. "I'm so sorry," I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant. "I thought—" "No," he interrupted gently. "No. You meant well, I know that. It's just the timing, the reaction, and the assistant recognizing it. Something's off." I didn't say anything right away. Just sat there, my fingers gripping the edge of the table, the words crawling up the back of my throat. What if it wasn't just a coincidence? What if it wasn't really meant for me? I left shortly after. He had to get back to work, and I needed air. The drive home was a blur. Red lights, pedestrians, the faint music of Asheville playing on porches and cafes, but none of it sank in. When I walked into my kitchen, I didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to the drawer where I kept my journal, flipped to a clean page, and wrote one line. Perfume. Where did she buy it? I sat with that question for a while, just stared at it, as if the ink might rearrange itself into an answer. Then something clicked. The shipping label. I remembered it from the box. It hadn't looked like anything I'd seen before. No recognizable branding, no boutique name, just a clean white label with a barcode and a P.O. box. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I searched online, typing in fragments of the barcode and phrases like discreet perfume shipping. Nothing helpful, but I still had the bottle. I grabbed it from the bedroom shelf, still as beautiful and cold as the day it arrived, and turned it over, looking for anything that might help. There, tiny print near the base, a serial number. I dialed the customer service line listed on the brand's website, and after a short wait, a polite woman picked up. "Thank you for calling Norio Fragrance. How can I assist you today?" I gave her the serial number and explained I'd received it as a gift, just wanted to know where it came from. There was a pause. "Ma'am," she said slowly, "I'm sorry, but this bottle was purchased under a private account." "Okay, is there any information you can share? Maybe the purchase date?" Another pause. Then she replied, "It was purchased about 6 months ago. March." I blinked. My mouth went dry. 6 months ago. 6 months ago, Seraphine was in Lisbon. That's what she told everyone. A European press tour for one of her clients. She'd posted photos of rooftops and wine glasses, handwritten captions about recharging creative energy. I remember because I'd commented on one of them. She never replied. But if she'd been out of the country, why would she be buying a local bottle of perfume? And why ship it from a P.O. box 20 minutes from her house? Something wasn't adding up. After I hung up, I sat on the couch, the perfume bottle resting in my palm. It felt heavier now. What if she never meant to give it to me? What if it had been repackaged, reassigned? What if it wasn't really a gift at all? I stayed there for a long time. The room slowly dimmed as the sun dipped below the trees. I didn't turn on a light, just let the dark come in naturally, the way it always did. And in that quiet space, with the bottle on my knee and the past echoing louder than ever, something finally clicked into place. This wasn't about birthdays. It wasn't about generosity. It was about intent. It was a Thursday evening, just cool enough to need a jacket. The kind of air that hinted fall was serious now. No more pretending summer might return. The sky held that soft blue haze that comes just before sunset, and I remember adjusting the sleeves of my cardigan while I stood on Seraphine's porch, mentally bracing for whatever version of her I was about to walk into. 2 days had passed since I'd spoken to the perfume company. 2 days since I learned that the bottle Seraphine gave me had been purchased locally. At the same time, she was supposedly off in Portugal, sipping wine and hashtagging rooftops. I hadn't confronted her. Not yet. Something told me not to play that card until I was ready. But I knew one thing for certain. That perfume was never meant to be a gift. I rang the doorbell. Inside, the house buzzed with voices, the clinking of silverware, and the unmistakable laughter Seraphine reserved for company, the kind that never quite reached her eyes. She opened the door herself, wearing a silk blouse the color of bone and a necklace that sparkled too perfectly. Her smile was immediate, polished. "Right on time," she said, stepping aside. Thaddeus, our father, was already seated at the head of the dining table. His posture was stiff, hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for an apology that hadn't yet arrived. I stepped inside slowly, nodding at him, and offered a polite smile to the others, a couple of Seraphine's acquaintances I didn't know by name, and a woman from the non-profit board she'd recently joined. But something was off. The air felt taut, controlled, like everyone knew this dinner wasn't about roast chicken and roasted root vegetables. I sat across from Thaddeus, and as the last guest settled in, Seraphine lifted her glass of wine. "Before we start," she said, her voice syrupy smooth, "I think it's time we talk about what happened to Aurelian." The room went still. She looked at me, not harshly, not with open accusation, but with that tone, the one she used when she wanted you to feel like you'd disappointed everyone, even God. "I've been thinking," she continued, "about the gift Sarah gave him, the perfume. And while I know it was meant kindly, maybe it just wasn't thought through." There it was. I didn't say a word, just placed my hands in my lap and listened. Thaddeus cleared his throat. "Sarah," he said, like he was starting a lecture, "you should have asked if that gift was even appropriate. Some scents can be quite triggering for people, and it wasn't yours to experiment with." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. That was the thing about my family. We never had to yell to draw blood. I looked down at my napkin, folded perfectly, starched within an inch of its life. "I had no idea," I said, quietly. "It was meant as a gesture." Seraphine tilted her head. "A gesture that ended in someone being rushed out of a meeting on oxygen." She made it sound like I'd sent anthrax in a gift bag. The other guests said nothing, just shifted awkwardly, stared at their wine glasses. It wasn't the first time I'd been framed as the problem. When I was 7, Seraphine knocked over Mom's violin, her prized possession from college, and the neck snapped clean off. She'd cried, full-blown tears, said she saw me playing with the case earlier that day. I hadn't touched it. But I was quiet, and she was dramatic, and Mom couldn't imagine her golden girl lying. So the blame fell on me. It always did. Broken windows, burnt cookies, a neighbor's missing cat that turned up in our garage. Somehow, even when I hadn't been there, the narrative found a way to put the weight on my shoulders. The difference now, I saw it, and I wasn't a child anymore. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't raise my voice or try to win the room. Instead, I let it happen. Let her paint me as impulsive, careless, irresponsible. Let Thaddeus frown in that way he always did when he thought I was too soft, too slow, too sentimental. But I took notes. In my mind, I made a list of everything said, who said it, who stayed silent. Aurelian arrived late. He walked in carrying a bottle of wine and paused the moment he stepped into the dining room. You could feel it. He sensed the tension before anyone said a word. He greeted everyone, gave Seraphine a quick kiss on the cheek, then sat down beside me. "I hope I didn't miss much," he said lightly. I saw the way his gaze flicked around the room. He was piecing it together. He looked at me. "You all right?" I nodded once, then turned back to my plate. Dessert was served, some kind of berry tart with a mint leaf placed just so, and the conversation drifted back to nonprofits and holiday planning. It wasn't until the table began to clear that Seraphine made her move. She leaned in, just enough so no one else could hear. Her voice low, precise. "Next time, keep your gifts to yourself." I turned toward her, slowly. She didn't blink. I smiled, just slightly, and replied, "Next time, keep your lies better hidden." Her pupils narrowed, jaw tightening just enough to confirm I'd struck something deeper than pride. She turned away before she could lose control of her expression. I stood, excused myself, and stepped outside into the night, The air had cooled even more. Leaves crunched under my shoes as I walked back to the car. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious either. What I felt was clarity. If this was the game she wanted to play, then I'd play it better. Because now, I wasn't just guessing. Now, I had questions worth answering. The sun hadn't even cleared the edge of the trees when I opened my eyes the next morning. I'd slept, technically, but not the kind that makes you feel rested. More like my body shut down just long enough to keep the lights on. I sat up slowly, pulled on my robe, and padded into the kitchen. The air was still. The kind of stillness that doesn't feel peaceful, just expectant. Coffee wasn't strong enough that day. I skipped it entirely and went for a notepad and pen instead. Sitting at the small table by the window, I drew a line down the center of the page like I had so many times before, habit learned from my librarian years. One column read, "What I know." The other, "What I can prove." The list on the left grew quickly. Seraphine told everyone she was in Portugal 6 months ago. The perfume was bought locally during that time. She used a private account for the purchase. The card said "Happy Birthday" with no name, no warmth. Her reaction when Aurelian wore the scent. The right column, though, was thinner. Bottle with serial number. Confirmation from the perfume company on date and purchase type. That imbalance between knowing and proving, that's what kept me up at night. I pushed the notebook aside and reached for the black velvet box still sitting on my bookshelf. I hadn't opened it again since the day it arrived, but something told me I missed something. This time, I pulled the entire interior padding out, not just the top layer. Folded underneath was a narrow slip of paper, not a receipt, a label. Norio Asheville, Biltmore Boutique, downtown, less than 20 minutes from where Seraphine lived. I stared at the label and exhaled slowly. You slipped up, Seraphine. After a quick shower and a light breakfast I barely tasted, I drove into town. The boutique was nestled between a French bakery and an interior design studio, exactly the kind of place Seraphine would spend her Saturdays. The inside smelled like orange blossom and sandalwood, subtle and expensive. The clerk, probably no older than 22, stood behind the counter with a soft smile and glossy hair. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone practiced but not unkind. "I hope so," I replied. "I was given a bottle of perfume recently. Norio Vert Blanche. I loved it. Thought I might want to order another one." "Of course," she said. "Do you have the bottle or a serial code?" I handed her a photo I'd taken of the bottom of the bottle that morning. She typed the number into the system. There was a pause, then her brow lifted slightly. "That bottle was purchased 6 months ago," she said. "It was a custom wrap." My pulse kicked up a notch. "Do you happen to know how it was delivered?" She glanced back at her screen. "It was a walk-in. Paid in full, wrapped here, picked up same day. Could you tell me who bought it?" "I'm afraid I can't give out personal information," she replied gently, "but I can confirm the initials on the account were SD. Seraphine Dalton." That was all I needed. I thanked her, left the boutique, and sat in my car for several minutes before turning the ignition. Half of me wanted to scream. The other half just wanted to sit there and breathe through the fury slowly gathering behind my ribs. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the autumn light had shifted. It was early afternoon now, the sun filtering through the trees in slanted lines. I went inside, pulled the journal back toward me, and added a new page. Entry, Perfume Timeline. Purchase date, March 12th. Boutique location, Asheville, in person. Claimed trip to Portugal, March 3rd, 24th. Boutique confirms initials, SD. Conclusion, she bought the perfume while lying about her location. I sat back in the chair and stared out the window. A neighbor's dog barked. A few leaves drifted from the old oak out front. I thought of all the times I'd been told I was overreacting. Or worse, being dramatic. This wasn't drama. This was evidence. I remembered something my mother used to say when we were kids. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand still long enough. Seraphine had always been the one with the loudest voice in the room, but I'd learned how to write things down, how to wait, how to let the facts do the talking. "Gifts from guilt often cost more than money," I said aloud, pen tapping against the paper. I flipped to a new page. At the top, I wrote in bold letters, Phase 2, watch, listen, wait. Just as I underlined it, a knock came at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I stood slowly, walked to the window, and peeked out. It was Aurelian. Alone. He wasn't smiling. I opened the door. "We need to talk," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. Alone. I stepped back and held the door open wider. Aurelian didn't speak right away. His face was tight, like someone holding his breath at a funeral. He walked in slowly, and I shut the door behind him. He didn't sit, just stood in the middle of the room, hands on his hips, eyes darting around like he didn't know where to land. "She's been lying to me," he said finally, voice flat. "Or maybe that's not even news to you anymore." I crossed my arms and stayed quiet. Let him find his pace. "There's something I think you should know," he continued, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't want to bring it up at dinner, but I remembered something after that whole mess. Weeks ago, maybe longer, I saw a bottle that looked exactly like the perfume you gave me. In her closet. Back corner. I just assumed it was hers, or maybe something she meant to re-gift. But after everything," he trailed off. "It's still there?" I asked. He nodded. "I didn't touch it. I didn't even think about it again until you said what you did at the table." I motioned to the couch. "You want a drink?" "No," he said. "I'm heading back home in a few. But I'll text you a picture when I get there." We stood in silence for a few beats. Then he added, "If she really did something, Sarah, I hope you don't just sit on it. I know you think too long sometimes." That stung more than I let on. After he left, I didn't move for a while. I just stood in the kitchen, staring out the window into the dark, thinking about how many times Seraphine had hidden things in plain sight, things she knew I wouldn't question. An hour later, a message lit up my phone. "Aurelian. Just took this." The same bottle, same ribbon. But the liquid inside looks lighter. Not sure if that means anything. Attached was a photo, and there it was. The bottle, the exact same one. Except the fluid inside was faintly pink, not the pale amber of mine. My hands went cold. She didn't give me something she bought for me. She gave me something she didn't dare keep. The next morning, I made an appointment at Carson Webb, the firm our family had used for everything from mortgages to medical directives since I was a kid. I called under the guise of needing to review my own estate plan, just a routine check-in. The receptionist greeted me with a polite smile, her earrings shaped like tiny ginkgo leaves. She offered me coffee while I waited, and I sat down in the same chair I'd used when my mother signed her last will. It had been 10 years. The chair hadn't changed. When they called me in, I was led to a room with a wall of leather-bound folders and a smell like paper and lemon oil. Ms. Hartridge, a junior partner, shook my hand and asked me what I needed. We walked through the basics of my modest estate, my house, savings, a few old family items, and then I leaned forward slightly. "While I'm here," I said casually, "I was wondering if I could get a look at my parents' trust structure. Just peace of mind. My sister mentioned she had updated something, and I want to make sure I understand what's changed." The assistant beside her clicked through a system and blinked. "Oh, yes. The Dalton Trust was revised about 5 months ago." "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to sound surprised, not furious. "Yes, Seraphine submitted the paperwork. It went through in April. Didn't she tell you?" I shook my head slowly. "No. I wasn't aware of any revisions." The assistant glanced nervously at Miss Hartridge. "Do you want me to pull the file?" "Please," I said. 10 minutes later, I was sitting at the long conference table with a manila folder open in front of me. Inside were copies of the updated trust documents. My name was no longer listed as a beneficiary. It wasn't just that she'd taken me out. It was that she'd done it using a scanned signature from our mother. The signature was dated, backdated actually, to a time that made it seem like Mom had signed it shortly before her final illness. My stomach turned. There are levels of betrayal in every family. You expect small ones, resentments, petty slights, forgotten birthdays. But this was an excavation. A conscious effort to dig me out of the foundation like I'd never been part of it. I didn't say a word as I closed the file, handed it back, and thanked them for their time. On the drive home, the sky was turning a soft gray, and the first drops of rain pattered on the windshield as I pulled into my driveway. Inside, I laid the copy I'd requested, the only piece of evidence I could take with me, on the kitchen table. Then I placed the perfume bottle beside it. The ribbon on the cap had started to fray. I opened my journal again, wrote at the top of a new page, "Truth they hoped I'd never find." Beneath that, I listed, "Duplicate perfume bottle found, visual difference in liquid, boutique confirms Seraphine bought locally. Trust revision filed using falsified signature. My name removed from inheritance." I stared at the list, then reached for a red pen and circled the last line. I didn't feel like crying. I didn't feel like yelling. I felt like moving, like momentum had finally caught up with me. She thought this was about a bottle, but it never was. I whispered, almost without meaning to, "You're about to learn it never was." I didn't rush my steps. From the street to Seraphine's front door, I walked like someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to show. The family dinner she invited us to came wrapped in a well-worded email. She called it a chance to reset, to clear the air after a few recent misunderstandings. She CC'd everyone, Dad, Aurelian, even two of our cousins who hadn't been involved in anything but were always good at nodding and staying neutral. It was classic Seraphine, control the room before the room gets a chance to speak. But this time, I had something she didn't count on. Truth, proof, and the nerve to put it all on the table, literally. I arrived 5 minutes early, gift bag in hand. Nothing fancy, just a plain navy blue tote with reinforced handles, the kind you'd get at a bookstore. It held 3 things: the perfume bottle, a copy of the trust revision, and the boutique receipt with her name printed in bold, unmistakable ink. Seraphine opened the door herself, smiling like I hadn't ever confronted her. "Sarah," she said smoothly, "so glad you could come." I stepped inside without responding. Her foyer smelled like lavender and pine, comforting to anyone who didn't know her long enough to be suspicious of anything that smelled too perfect. Aurelian was already there, seated near the fireplace, fiddling with his phone. He looked up when he saw me and nodded once. I couldn't read the expression on his face yet. Dad was in his usual chair at the head of the table, shoulders squared, mouth tight. His suit jacket hung on the back of the chair, always prepared to appear official, even in personal affairs. The cousins were whispering in the hallway, probably wondering what this dinner was actually about. We all gathered at the dining table, the same one from earlier weeks, the table where I first saw Seraphine flinch when Aurelian wore the perfume, the table where she tilted blame like a waiter pouring wine. She sat at the other end this time, opposite Dad, trying to look balanced, moderate, calm. Dinner started with salad and safe conversation, someone's retirement, the local school board, a new yoga class. But I could feel it building. That slow pressure behind the eyes. The air got heavier with every passing minute, every clink of silverware against porcelain. Halfway through the entree, I cleared my throat gently and reached for the gift bag resting by my feet. "There's something I want to return," I said, not loud, but clear. Heads turned. Seraphine froze, her fork suspended midair. I pulled out the perfume bottle first. Set it down in the center of the table. "The gift you gave me. Or rather, the one you repackaged." Aurelian's eyes narrowed. Dad shifted in his seat. Next, I removed the envelope with the trust documents, laid it beside the bottle. "This one wasn't as pretty, but it still came with your name on it." I slid the third item out, my printed copy of the boutique receipt. Bold black text, no room for denial. I turned it towards Seraphine, but didn't push it forward. Let her decide whether to look. I wanted to believe the perfume was careless, that it was just your usual brand of thoughtless. But then I learned it was bought here, in town, while you were supposedly overseas. No one spoke. I looked to Dad. And this document here, this trust revision? My name was removed, signed with a scanned version of Mom's signature, backdated. She'd already passed when this was filed. His face was blank, not shocked, not defensive, just blank. Seraphine sat very still, her back straight, eyes pinned to the documents like they were ticking. Finally, she spoke. "You twisted this," she said, her voice rising just enough to rattle the plates. "You're trying to make me look like the villain here." I didn't move. "You gave me a bottle filled with silence," I said evenly, "and thought I'd drink it." She stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. Her hands were shaking, just barely. Dad opened his mouth to speak, but she cut him off. "She was never meant to have anything anyway." There it was. The words exploded in the room like a firecracker in a church. Aurelian stood slowly, his napkin falling to the floor. He looked at her like he didn't know who he'd married. The cousins were wide-eyed, lips pressed tight. Dad leaned back, hands resting on the table, eyes drifting between me and the stack of truth I had just placed in front of them all. I gathered the documents, the bottle, and tucked them neatly back into the bag. "This was never about a gift," I said, voice steady. "It was about who gets to matter." And with that, I pushed back my chair and walked toward the door. Nobody stopped me. I didn't sleep the night after the dinner. Not because of rage, not even pain. It was something quieter than that, an emptiness that came after everything inside you had already burned out. I sat on my porch swing with a blanket over my lap, the sky shifting from deep navy to gray, and listened to the world wake up without needing me to respond. I didn't expect anyone to call. But at 6:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Aurelian. "I left. Can I call you later?" I didn't answer immediately. I stared at the message for several minutes, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally had the power to decide if I wanted to say anything at all. Instead of texting back, I stood, went inside, made tea, and waited for the next domino to fall. It didn't take long. By mid-morning, my voicemail was full. Seraphine called 5 times in the span of an hour. The first message was snippy, coded in that high-pitched veneer she always used when she wanted to sound composed, but was cracking. "You humiliated me. That was a private family matter and you—" Delete. The second message tried to take a softer tone. "I know we've had our issues, but airing them like that? Sarah, come on, this isn't who you are?" Actually, I thought, this is exactly who I've always been. You just never listened. The next 3 messages teetered between rage and desperation. One even ended with her breaking down into tears, gasping out that people were asking questions and she couldn't fix it all. That part? That wasn't my responsibility. At noon, the call came from the family's attorney, a man I hadn't spoken to in years, not since Mom's will was read in that same oak-paneled room where Seraphine played the role of oldest daughter like it was a pageant. "Miss Dalton," he said with practiced neutrality, "we were reviewing your family trust. I was unaware your name had been removed. That shouldn't have happened without your consent." I let that silence sit. "It's being reinstated," he added. "Your father has requested it personally." I don't know what struck me harder, that Seraphine had gone behind Dad's back, or that Dad had actually taken a step toward correcting it. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice even. "He also asked if you might be willing to speak with him." I hesitated. "When?" "He said you'd know when you're ready." I wasn't, not yet, but I knew I would be. 2 days passed. Enough time for the buzz around the dinner confrontation to spread. Small-town buzz is different. It's subtle, like the way neighbors water their lawns a little longer when you're outside, hoping you'll offer a sliver of gossip. And then came the video. I don't know who told Seraphine it was a good idea, but there she was on social media, teary-eyed, voice trembling just enough, talking into the front-facing camera like she was the victim of an internal war none of us could understand. "I made mistakes," she said, wiping at eyes that didn't look red. "But I was trying to protect what mattered. Sometimes we make choices we can't undo, and people don't know the full story." Cue the piano music, the filtered lighting. Within hours, it blew up. Not in the way she hoped. Comments flooded in, screenshots of her previous posts claiming she was in Portugal during the perfume purchase, questions about the trust documents, speculation about her finances. People didn't want perfection anymore. They wanted transparency. And Seraphine had built an entire brand on airbrushed lies. By the end of the week, 2 of her brand sponsorships had pulled out. Her name trended locally, then regionally. And Aurelian. He filed for legal separation and moved into a rental apartment on the other side of town. He didn't tell me at first. I found out through one of the cousins who forwarded me a listing and said, "Recognize the couch?" It was the same one Seraphine swore was too tacky for the living room, the one Aurelian had picked out with care, then stored in the garage for months. I met Dad on a Sunday afternoon. He'd asked me to stop by if I had time. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed to close that loop. He was in the study, sitting in the chair where he used to do taxes, read newspapers, and pretend not to play favorites. "Sarah," he said, standing halfway before deciding against it. I nodded politely. "I didn't know she filed those changes," he said. "I assumed it was all in order. Your mother—" He stopped. "She wanted everything split equally." I believed that. He looked at me then, not like the little girl who spilled juice on the carpet, but like someone who might have been worth listening to all along. "We were wrong about you," he said quietly. I was wrong. I didn't cry. I nodded once. That was all I needed. But it wasn't all I wanted. I left without saying more. Some things don't require an encore. 2 days later, I walked into the lawyer's office and signed the reinstatement papers. No celebration, no handshakes, just a clean signature and the shake in my fingers I couldn't quite steady. The assistant tried to make small talk. I gave her a small smile. She slid the final folder across the table. "This secures your portion," she said. I nodded. It was never about money. I stood, tucked the pen back into my purse, and glanced at the door. It was about finally being seen. The morning sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains in my living room, laying quiet golden stripes across the rug. For once, it wasn't trying to wake me up or chase shadows off the walls. It just was. I sat in my favorite chair by the window, the one with the flattened cushion and tea rings on the armrest, holding a mug that had gone cold long before I even noticed. The house was still, not in the heavy, oppressive way it used to be, but in that unfamiliar peace that comes after a storm has finally passed. Not everything was repaired, not every piece of debris cleared, but it was quiet. I glanced at the navy blue bag still sitting in the corner of the room. It hadn't moved since the night I placed it there, after the confrontation. Inside were the perfume bottle, the copies of the trust papers, and my notebook, worn soft from flipping its pages so many times. Funny how something that had once felt like a bomb now looked more like a forgotten library return. I sipped what was left of my tea and set the mug down gently on the table. The air had changed in the last week, not just inside the house, but inside me. I walked into my bedroom and pulled open the bottom drawer of the old cedar chest I'd kept at the foot of my bed for years. It was my mother's, the kind of trunk that smelled of wood oil, time, and a life I could only touch through scent and memory now. Beneath the folded quilts and a stack of letters tied in blue ribbon was a delicate handkerchief. Inside it, wrapped with care, was a small, squat glass vial with no label. The moment I unwrapped it, the scent drifted up, jasmine and old books, the faintest trace of honey and cloves. My mother's perfume. Not something expensive, not meant for showing off. It was the kind of scent that lingered after a good hug, after bedtime stories, after words like, "I'm proud of you," whispered when the world wasn't watching. As I held the vial, a memory floated to the surface. Me as a child, sitting in front of her vanity, watching her brush her hair. She looked at me in the mirror and said, "You matter more than you'll ever be told. Don't ever forget it, even when people try to." And hadn't they tried? They tried with silence, with omission, with beautiful lies wrapped in velvet. But I hadn't forgotten. I tucked the handkerchief and the vial into my dresser drawer, not out of sight, but closer. Something worth keeping. That afternoon, while washing a few dishes in the sink, my eyes landed on a cream-colored envelope on the kitchen counter. I knew who it was from even before I picked it up. Seraphine's handwriting was unmistakable, slanted, flawless, like it had been trained in a convent. No return address. No note on the outside. I didn't open it. Instead, I slid it between the last pages of my notebook. Some apologies aren't written to heal. They're written to shift the weight of guilt off the sender's chest and onto yours. I'd carried enough of that. Let her keep hers. The following day, I made one last appointment at the estate office. The lawyer looked at me with practiced politeness as I walked in. We signed the final amendment that restored my place in the trust. No mention of lawsuits, no whisper of what had been removed or replaced. "You do realize," he said gently, sliding the papers toward me, "you could still challenge the previous forgery. It would hold." I shook my head. Let her rebuild herself. I'm not carrying this anymore. I didn't want to be the reason she lost everything. That was the difference between us. She tried to erase me. I just stepped out of her shadow. On my way home, I stopped by a women's shelter thrift store in West Asheville. I handed the perfume bottle, still in its box, to the young woman behind the desk. "No name," I said, when she asked if I wanted to leave contact info. "It's beautiful," she said, opening the lid. "Expensive, too." "Maybe someone will appreciate it," I replied. "Or maybe they'll just like the smell." I didn't need it anymore. That afternoon, I walked into downtown for coffee with Leora. The air was crisp, the trees loud with color, fiery reds, deep oranges, yellow just starting to turn. Asheville had never looked more like a painting. We sat by the cafe window in silence, not because we had nothing to say, but because the quiet finally felt earned. A small boy passed the window holding his mother's hand, and for a split second, he turned, looked directly at me, and smiled wide. I smiled back. My hand rested over my heart, where that old scent still lingered, light as a whisper, permanent as a promise. She gave me a perfume that was meant to erase me. But I chose one that reminds me who I've always been. Sometimes, the most painful betrayals don't come from strangers. They come gift-wrapped from the people who claim to love you most. This story isn't just about perfume or even inheritance. It's about choosing dignity when silence is no longer survival. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect your peace? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe if you want more true-to-life family stories that cut deep and stay with you long after the video ends.